We are live. Hello, YouTube. I remember today, probably for the first time, maybe ever, to go to our Facebook group and say, "Hey, we're going to record," because I've been tweeting to like 9 people on Mastodon or whatever, and so like nobody knows we're doing this. But.
One of those people is Mark, because he texts me like every Sunday and is like, "Are you guys recording today? When are you recording?"
I don't know. I'll ask.
We don't know.
Yeah, honestly, we don't know. As
You tell us.
we literally make it up like an hour before the show most of the time. So
Sometimes we make it up after the show.
Yeah. I did. There was. It wasn't for this podcast, but there was an instance where I wanted to have Ron Howard say, he wasn't. It was in response to somebody saying, "I say I'm right."
yes, the narrator. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was actually super hard to find, and what I ultimately ended up doing was finding someone who had like trained an AI to do Ron Howard's voice and then narrated like an episode of Succession or something like that. And there was I found Ron Howard saying, Ron Howard in quotes, saying he wasn't. So I used that, but
Worth it.
yeah. But see, this is how we can handle it if Carrington doesn't turn on his recording.
I've been AI for years.
Does explain a lot.
You think this exists in real life? Please. Ding.
Okay, let's see. So we think that Michael might come, but
I think, he might be here a little late.
But due to time zone issues, because
Time zones.
yeah, they just lost daylight savings time, so, and he adjusted the wrong way, or I adjusted the wrong way, or someone adjusted the wrong way.
You're talking like one of those globe Earth people.
Yeah.
Like, it's not enough that we have daylight savings, but like we can't even agree when to do it. That's the worst part. Like every country does it like a different week, like within a month of period. Like, oh, jeez.
Okay. Are we ready? I think I could maybe start. Everyone recording?
Yes.
All right. Am I? Yes. It's April 7th, 2024, and welcome to episode 274 of the Retrocomputing Roundtable. The RCR is a podcast about retrocomputer news, nostalgia, collecting, and things of 1974. I am Paul Hagstrom near Boston, and I am joined today by 3 retrocomputing enthusiasts, and I am joined today by 4 retrocomputing enthusiasts for the edit later. First on my screen is Carrington Vanston in Toronto. How are you?
I'm excellent. I am not a thing of 1974. I'm an older product than that, but I came anyway.
Excellent. Also joining us is Quinn Dunkey, a British Columbian hermit. How are
Yes,
you?
I am nearly a product of 1974. Missed it by a couple of months, but yes, it's delightful here in the deep woods of British Columbia. It's spring, and very happy about that.
Excellent. And also joining us is Earl Evans in Portland. How are you?
Yeah, hello there. I was creeping up on being a teenager in 1974.
Excellent.
You were a creepy teenager in 1974?
I didn't say that, but yes, that is true as well.
Yeah, I think I was 3 at that point. So, we're all right around in this same area. And yeah, I'm leaving space for Michael in case at some point he appears. But okay, so we've been, as I keep re-explaining every time we start this, that we've been tying the episode number to the year. And since this is episode 274, we're now talking about 1974 and things that happened in 1974. And, whenever I go and look at this, it's always very difficult to pin things down to a year because things take longer than a year to develop. And so you get like Xerox PARC Alto, is like smeared across all kinds of years.
Every year.
So I think we're not going to talk about that this time, if that's all right, because I think we probably have last couple times. But so let's see. I made a little list. I don't know if other people have other things on the list as well. But so the first thing that I saw was the Selby 8H, Do people know the Selby 8H?
Only by name. Don't know much
yeah.
about it.
Let's see. Here it is. So I'm looking at the Computer History Museum's 1974 page, and Selby advertises its 8H computer.
It looks like a drawer that's supposed to slide into something else.
Yeah, it's right. Exactly.
Was it a filing cabinet computer? Cool.
It's like a little box with a facade panel, and then a bunch of cards lined up behind it.
It's the fake Western town of computing.
Right.
It looks like a backplane design, actually, which is a very popular homebrew format to this day. Mm-hmm. So one of those cards would probably be the CPU card, and then one would be RAM, and one would be ROM, and they all plug into a backplane.
Yeah. So there is on historyofinformation.com. There's a sort of a discussion of this. The article is entitled "The Selby 8H, probably the first advertised personal computer sold in kit form."
Can't even make the sentence without probably in front of it.
Even with all
qualification.
Even with all the qualifiers, still probably not true.
Yeah, I found that very amusing. But
there should be a ban on the word "first" in computer history reporting. Like, just stop using that word, because nothing is first.
Nothing ever came first.
But so the I've seen one actually. So Mike Willigal has spent a fair amount of time with the Selby 8H. So he's written up a page about it. It's based on the Intel 8008, and so it's early adopter of this kind of technology. But so Mike had he's collected a bunch of stuff. He's got some working things, and he also put together kind of like a reproduction kit, so you can build your own Selby 8H.
That's really neat, actually.
Yeah.
I wonder what the last backplane machine was. This has got to be close to that. I guess for people who don't know, there's sort of two major physical architectures that were kind of competing. Backplane being this style, where you've got basically the main bus of the machine is on its own card horizontally at the bottom, and all the cards plug into it physically vertically. Then later on, we move to motherboard designs, where most of the computer is on a single board, because it's of course cheaper and easier and faster, better performance and so on. But yeah, this design, I mean, by the mid 70s, we've got to be close to the end of backplane designs. It's a very nice modular idea. I think this is why it's so appealing. It's why so many of us still do it for homebrew computers, myself included. But you're relying a lot on those physical connections, and they create reliability issues, and you're limited in performance. You can only go probably to 20 megahertz, something like that, before those physical connectors and the right angles that it creates in your signal traces start to be a problem. So this is got to be close to the end of the line for that architecture, but it's still it's got an elegance to it that I think we lost with motherboards.
I wonder if it's still in some industrial things. This is just a wild guess. But in the 90s, I worked for a company that made internetworking gear like routers and switches. Mm-hmm. And one of our flagship product was a passive backplane design like this.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, and I guess the word backplane gets fuzzy too, I guess, because I worked at SGI for a while, and this was right after the acquisition of Cray, and so they had some Cray technology in some of the later SGI workstation render farms, and they had what they called an optical backplane design in those render farm servers, but they used the word backplane, but it wasn't a physical PCB. It was just a fiber optic interconnect between the different CPU boards. So I don't know if that counts or not, but they used the word because it's a cool sounding word, I think. But it wasn't really. It was really just fiber optic cables.
The Lisa actually had something that was sort of like this. It wasn't completely just like nothing plus slots, but it was. It did have, like, its CPU was on a card and its RAM was on a different card.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to be fair, it's sort of a gray area. Like it's not a clean divide. There are certainly quote unquote motherboard computers, yeah, but still had a lot on the cards. I mean, even like you could argue that about the Apple II machines that had a language card, where a bunch of your RAM was on a card, or the 2GS where most of your RAM was actually on a card, even though it's technically a motherboard machine. So yeah, there's certainly gray areas there.
Yeah. Let's see. This is the Lisa. So the sort of like the main thing at the bottom of the Lisa is just a place where you plug in the CPU and the RAM and some other stuff. So
that's interesting. I wonder why they did that in the Lisa. It's an interesting choice. Like, I wonder what they were gaining by doing that. I wonder if they had visions of offering other CPUs or something, or if it was a hedge against technology changing during development or something along those lines.
yeah, I don't know. One thing I do know about these Lisa I think they're called the motherboard, but they are really just slots and ports. But these are the things that get damaged. Like if there was a battery, it'll be right above this and it will leak onto it. So, let's see. Yeah, if you wanted to read more about the Selby. Oh yeah, there was one other thing I was going to mention too, which was the RC 2014 also has that kind of a design. That's sort of a modern Z80 kit. So if you're building a kit computer, this also is, sort of just in modules that you put together.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a good format for kit computers because A, your clock speeds aren't that high, so you can get away with the architecture, and B, that modularity really helps you during development because you can test your cards in isolation and expand it gradually. Or if you decide you need to redesign something because you understand, how ROM works better now, you can just rebuild that board and swap it out without having to redo an entire motherboard. It has a lot of advantages for a hobbyist for sure. Folks in the comments are suggesting other machines as well, like the S100 was basically a backplane. The Atari 800, interesting conversation there, is arguably also a backplane design. There's probably room for disagreement there, but that's an interesting thought.
I wonder if it has to do
the
with
RAM
just
and the
right
ROM
angles.
were definitely on the 800. The RAM and the ROM were in that sort of an arrangement, but I thought that the 6502 itself and the Antic chip and that were on the actual motherboard.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Greg in the comments is saying that the 6502 was on a card, so that would certainly be most of the computer being on cards, I guess. I mean, there's no scientific definition of any of this, but I guess at some point, some percentage of the computer being on cards makes it a backplane. I don't know.
Right.
That's neat, though.
And yeah. Let's see. Oh, and one last thing on the Selby 8H, which I interrupted myself before I got to, which is that at VCF West 2020, which was virtual, Mike Willigel did a little video display, sort of demoing the Selby. He wrote a little like hangman game, or like a word guess game, and so you can if you want to see it in action there, that is available to you.
I wonder if that's the first and only game ever written for that machine.
I wonder.
Might be an
I
untapped
think
market.
Doom came out on it last year.
Yeah, probably.
Right.
Should release that though. There's zero competition on that platform, so
Can own the market.
yeah. Charge $1,000 for that game. People have to buy it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So the Intel 8008. I'm not sure. I don't think that was 1974. That might have been the year before, but that people started using it a lot in 1974. So
yeah, before prior to the 6502, that was the big deal about the 6502. It was basically a cheaper 8008 because the 8008 was sort of the first practical 8-bit CPU. People are going to argue with me about that, I guess, but it was very expensive. That was its big problem. So the 6502 was famously so cheap that they put a bunch of them in a candy jar at whatever that trade show was where Wozniak first learned about it. And so they were selling them for $20 a piece out of this candy jar, which was I guess, incredibly cheap compared to the alternatives at the time.
Yeah. Let's see. Actually, I guess I did have oh no, I see. The 8080 was the 1974 introduction. So this is like a successor of a sort to the 8008.
Yeah, I think it's more of a spiritual successor. The 8008 was the 8-bit an 8-bit version of the 404, which was Intel's big like calculator CPU. A lot of calculators had the 404 in it because 4 bits is enough for a calculator, but not really enough for a computer. So when the 8008 came out, a bunch of computers got excited about it and started using it.
The 8080 though, that did get into a lot of these sort of historical computers that when people started having them. So the MITS Altair 8800 and the IMSI 8080, the Sol 20.
Yeah, and this was of course the birth of the x86 architecture, which would of course go on to be a fad that died out quickly.
Right. Yeah, is the Intel in my last Intel Mac a relative of that or not? I'm not sure how much it is. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think tech historians mostly agree that the 8080 was the origins of that architecture of what became the x86. The 8080 begat the 8086, which begat the 186, and so on. So I think that's generally an agreed upon timeline. I think the architecture is similar enough that one is considered the progenitor of the others. I think the 8008 was very different. I'm not qualified enough to tell you exactly how, but that's my understanding.
I didn't realize that the Z80 was basically just a enhanced, or maybe cheaper Intel 8080. Like its machine codes are the same. They had to do something sort of IP related to change the mnemonics or something like that, but otherwise it's like drop-in replacement, I think.
Yeah, it was. I think it was supposed to be. It was a cheaper alternative. It was It was like the AMD of its day. It was a cheap clone initially. I think was the idea of that. And the same. They were trying to do the same thing the 6502 did, which was make a cheap CPU because everyone knew CPUs were important, but they were too expensive, so nobody was using them. Or not very many. So that was the idea of the Z80 as well.
Someday I'm going to learn how to program Z80 assembly.
Again, for homebrew enthusiasts, they are a good choice because they have a solid state core in them, or not solid state, a stateless core. So you can stop the clock and the CPU retains its state. The 6502 does not. So if you want a single step of 6502, you can't just stop the clock. It loses its registers and so on within some number of nanoseconds. But the Z80 doesn't. So that's really actually quite useful when you're trying to learn how to build computers. So Z80 a popular choice for that reason. And then of course the other advantage of a Z80 is that you've got CPM, is there for you when you get to that point with your computer. Because if you're going to homebrew a computer, at some point you're going to need an operating system, and running that yourself kind of sucks unless you really like that sort of thing. So, so CPM is apparently, I've never done it, but apparently quite easy to port to anything that's got a Z80 chip in it. You just got to give it a few hooks for where your memory map lines up, and CPM will do the rest. So that's immensely powerful.
So here's a fun fact that I learned today while we were talking. I was watching the chat and also going out and Googling. Apparently, the Atari 800 did, in fact, have the CPU on a card in the machine. So it had some of the other support chips on the motherboard that you can see if you go look at one of the images of the motherboard. But the CPU itself was on a card, and one of the articles out there was wondering, why did they make that kind of choice? It's pretty fascinating. But thanks to folks in the chat for pointing that out. It's very interesting.
Yeah, the journey from backplane to motherboard was very much a crossfade. There's no clear line, I think, is what we've learned from our chat this morning, which is pretty interesting stuff.
I wonder, so one of the things that I came across that wasn't related to the year, but is the Liberate 09 project, which is putting a 6809 into an Atari. And I wonder if that made use of this. I mean, like, I have no idea, and somebody here probably is in the chat knows it deeply well. But I guess I'm just wondering if, given that the 6502 is on a card, maybe that was the way to introduce the 6809 into the Atari.
Yeah.
But
we could do a whole show on the 6809. It is the most underappreciated CPU in home computer history. It's like the Amiga of CPUs. Like, it's so good, but like through unfortunate circumstances of history, it never got its fair shake. And yeah, it's vastly underappreciated.
it's the Coco processor, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's one major computer that ended up with it. I think it's the Coco, and there's just some amazing operating systems that have been written for it, and it can do things that at the time nothing else could do. Like, you could do reasonable multi-user environments with it, and some reasonable approximations of memory protection with it, like all kinds of stuff that the mainstream CPUs wouldn't get for many years later. I think it was overlooked.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, it was also in the Vectrex.
I didn't know that.
Right there, I'm looking right at it.
Yeah.
But very cool, and also in the Dragon. But I thought the Dragon was sort of a Coco clone, and I think we've covered this before. But the sort of like fan convention thing called DragonCon was named DragonCon after the computer that ran the BBS system that like organized it. I mean, it's actually named
Really?
after the Dragon.
Really?
computer. Yeah.
What?
You just blew my mind with that
I
fact.
had no idea.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
a very weird fact.
That is an amazing fact. Wow.
So now I feel like I need to verify.
Now you
but
feel
I'm
like you
pretty
gotta
sure.
Google it? 'Cause I'm like,
DragonCon computer BBS.
there's
But,
no way I would have guessed that.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
While you're Googling, since we're talking about CPU history, a lot of people also argue that the 6502 was the birth of RISC, reduced instruction set computing. That's one of the ways that it got its performance and its ease of use, and like the amount of work it does in a single clock cycle and so on is all largely down to how few instructions the chip actually has. So it does a lot with only a handful of instructions compared to, where the x86 architecture went the other way. It was very, very CISC for quite a while, or rather Motorola, I should say. Like, you look at the 68,000 instruction set, and it's just ridiculous. There's like dozens and dozens and dozens of instructions. Like, there's a specific instruction for every single thing you want to do. It's like, oh, you want to divide these two 32-bit numbers and then store the result in that register and the remainder in that register and the sum of them in that memory location at the same time. We have an instruction for that. It takes 75 clock cycles, but there it is. But if you trace the history of RISC, I mean, people credit normally MIPS with sort of the birth of RISC, but if you see who the engineers were that worked on at MIPS and where they got their ideas from and so on, it kind of all goes back to the 6502 as a low instruction count philosophy, which enables you to simplify the core, simplify the ALU, and get more performance out of it. So you end up that whole idea of, hey, we can simplify this so much that you can write 50 instructions and do the same amount of work in space that would take a single instruction on a CISC chip, but take two times as many clock cycles. That came from the 6502.
6502, though, were they doing it for efficiency or for cost?
Both, really. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you had to pick one, I'd say cost. Yeah, it was by simplifying the core, lowering the transistor count, lowering the integration density. They made the chip cheaper, but I think it had, I don't know if it was unexpected or expected, but it had performance benefits as a result as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Here we are on the DragonCon Wikipedia page. It says the name Dragon for the club was derived from Kramer's Dragon computer, which hosted a local bulletin board system, the Dragon.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's got to be the only Dragon-based BBS in history also, which is kind of amazing. Mm-hmm. That is crazy. I had no idea. I mean, it's already a good name. Like, it's a good thing that computer wasn't named like Filbert or something, and it would be the great role-playing convention would be called FilbertCon, and everyone would be like, what the heck is this? Like, how handy that it happened to be named the Dragon.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Right. Let's see. The I will skip. I think I will skip over MVS. IBM MVS was introduced, multiple virtual storage, but I don't know anything about Z machines. I think we've been yelled at before about not knowing enough about IBM mainframes, but I still don't. But SQL is from 1974, and I think we must have all have encountered that.
Oh my gosh.
It's a good example of everything is older than you think it is. I would never have guessed SQL dated back to the 70s.
It was actually originally called SEQUEL.
Yeah,
but
I do remember that. Yeah.
There was a copyright dispute or something, so they removed the vowels.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Backtracking real quick, just to fact check. One of our commenters has pointed out the 8808 was not related to the 4004, so I misspoke on that. It's actually a re-implementation of the discrete processor board of the data point 2200. So that's some next level information there. Appreciate that, Norbert.
Yes.
Saved us a bunch of email.
Okay, let's see. I don't know if I have anything to say about SQL except just that I've, whatever.
I still use it.
Fought with it a lot.
Constantly.
Yeah.
It's such a
I'm sure we've all used
huge
it.
part of my life. Yeah.
People still use it. People still inject it. And
Yes.
Little Johnny tables, we call it.
Yes,
still
little,
use it
little
and try
Johnny
to-
tables. Yeah.
I still use it and try to get people to not inject it on the other end of it. Please don't inject stuff in my databases. But yeah, SQL is still a huge part of my daily work.
Yeah. Actually, I also misspoke. It's Bobby tables. I am almost positive.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's Bobby Tables. Yeah.
Yeah.
SQL.
And
SQL,
you've learned to
SQL,
sanitize your
SQL.
database inputs.
Yes, if anyone somehow is not familiar with XKCD, go do that, and we'll see you back here in 3 years.
Right.
yeah.
The little Bobby Tables.
So I think the one thing we can say about 1974 without running afoul of any fact checking is that a heck of a lot happened in 1974. It just seems like this year that so many things are starting to come together. The primordial personal computer and some of the core data processing concepts that we'd use going forward. It's just from here on out, I think it's going to be probably challenging to really give the proper credit to each year as we come across it on RCR because, man, in 1974, it just really started to spiral.
At least it'll be increasingly things I've actually used. So that's good.
and or heard of.
Right.
Although we're
So
still
there'll
at
be
we're still at the stage of every show I learn about a computer I didn't know that existed. This time it was what was that thing called? The H8? The
The Cuthbert.
Selby.
Selby.
H,
Yeah.
Right, and Filbert Kahn.
Yeah. And Phil Burkon, yeah. I think what's interesting to me is that we're learning how much was going on in the 70s, early 70s in particular, in all of these spaces, but it was not in the pop culture yet at all. Like people in the early 70s were not talking about this stuff, but all of these incredible seeds were being planted for stuff that was going to set the course of technology for the next 50 years. But I mean, there was, everyone was just talking about disco and inflation and oil crisis, but like computers was just not a thing yet anyone was talking about, and yet all of this stuff was happening just under the surface. It's super interesting because like the 80s you could feel it in the air, right? By then everyone knew computers were going to be a thing, and we were all talking about them and everybody was buying them, and it was obvious. It was the subject of every TV show and so on, but in the 70s it was still percolating.
I think there were a lot in sci-fi and maybe even a little in the mainstream consciousness in that the computers that you would see on TV back then were just these incredible beastly things that did things that they couldn't have possibly done. And, there was a certain amount of anxiety. I think I remember reading in the 60s and 70s about the computers are going to come for us and they're, going to take us over and that kind of thing. But you're right, just the reality of computing wasn't in the consciousness at all. It was just some sort of vague thing that ooh, look, spinning dials or that. But
Yeah, it's a good point that when it did appear in pop culture, it was still that sort of 1950s idea of computing. Like that was the last impression that people had of it. The idea of personal computers or small computers just really hadn't appeared yet. But yeah, you make an interesting point too about the conversation about it was very much like the one we're having now about AI, where people are simultaneously very excited and very scared of it, and we're not sure exactly where it's going to go.
Okay, let's see. There was one more thing. Maybe we have associations with this. I don't know. But apparently, 1974 was maybe when John Draper found the whistle in the Captain Crunch box, or the properties.
Oh, the 2600 hertz whistle.
Yeah. So, from what I understand, reading up on this a little bit, I think it was known that what the 2600 hertz would do to the telephone lines, but the interesting thing was that it turned out that this serial company gave out a little whistle that
happened to be
without
at that
any
frequency.
electronics. Yeah. So,
But was it an accident?
Yes, right. So somebody deep in the design of Captain Crunch cereal toys.
It's like, I think he's really a pirate.
Yes. It's true, actually. It's kind of a funny cereal to have found that in.
But remember, I think it was,
Yeah.
you can't use the Captain Crunch whistle as it is. You have to cover one of the holes or something.
Oh, really? This is beyond what I knew.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, there's like these two holes, and if you cover up one of them and you blow into it, you'll get approximately 2600. So I think he's the one who figured out, hey, look, I can get the pitch out of this plastic whistle.
cool.
The captain works in subtle ways, man.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about in that domain. I sort of feel like maybe we should just wait until some other episode. But yeah, super interesting stuff playing with.
We don't want to get sued by Big Crunch.
Yeah. I unfortunately, I sort of learned about all this stuff at a point when it was no longer possible. All the phone systems had switched to the electronic switching systems that didn't do this anymore. But
Yeah, I'm the same. I missed the
otherwise-
boat on that stuff. It was mostly gone by the time I learned about it.
What I just learned is you just showed a picture of the whistle. I thought it was green. It's red.
this particular one is red, but
I think it must
I've
have come in
seen
different
pictures of
colors.
green
I've
ones.
seen one, and I swear it was green,
Yeah,
like a
I'm
lime green.
I'm sure it came in different colors, like those
Okay.
plastic cereal toys. They always come in
It's
5
like,
colors.
what's happening? Okay, yeah.
Here. This.
Oh,
this-
yeah.
There you go.
That's
green
what I
one.
thought it looked like. Right, okay.
Yeah. So I've pulled up an image on a different article, but anyway, yeah, it's possible we could move on now from 1974. But yeah, lots of stuff
1975.
happening, and I do think Earl's right that it's going to be very hard to contain, to attribute things to particular years and to contain it to just a portion of an hour to talk
Yeah,
about it.
things kind of get crazy from here
Yeah.
in a good way.
All right, let's see. So I guess we can move on from that to our items of interest and news that we have brought in. And Carrington has the first of these.
Go me. I don't know much about this, except it's yet another card to bring modern video to your Apple II. So this is the A2 VGA mini card, which is available now, $45. Comes as a 2E and 2 Plus version. And it's just one of those things where you pop it in your computer and you have VGA out. You can kind of tell from the layout of the card that the cable points inside the card. Here's a picture one. You can see how so your cables have to go through and go to the back of the card, but such is the nature of the back of Apple IIs. It's funny because for the longest time, this was such a massive struggle. If you wanted to hook up an Apple II to a relatively modern monitor, it was a pain. And then over the last few years, there's 10,000. It just became a solved problem. And suddenly there's 1 million cards. So this is another one. And I just love that they exist. And, 15 years ago, me would have killed for this thing. So $45 available now. It's neat. I like it very much. I like that it comes in a purple. I like the color. So hooray for that. But just plug and play, pop it in, hook up. And the nice thing with VGA, it's really easy to convert from that to anything else. So if you have a VGA out, it's very easy to make that display on a modern, HDMI monitor or whatever. So it's a nice basic thing. So it's not maybe as nice as going straight to HDMI, but really highly compatible with even like older monitors. So I dare get an old like multi-sync monitor or something would be great with this. So it's cool. It's available now. I dig it. We'll have a link in the show notes. And I think for $45, that's great. That's fantastic. Like, as not even a kit, you get it and plug it in. That's amazing. That's a great cost for that kind of thing.
That is really cheap. Yeah, remember how sad we all were when Nishida Radio stopped making things, and we were like, well, retrocomputing over.
Right.
And now, suddenly, now you can't throw a rock without hitting an Apple II VGA solution.
And yet also remember, these things are always done by small people and hobbyists, and it's available now, and it will be soon gone and gone forever. So if you're interested, buy it. Buy it and stick it in the closet, because like if you're listening to this podcast 3 years from now, I bet you think, oh, I would have loved to get one of those, and now they're gone. So
yeah.
I think that's Paul's motto, right? Buy it and stick it in the closet somewhere.
Yeah, it's so
Paul by
frustrating. Yeah. I do think I think I did buy one, but I was looking around to see where it is, and I'm not sure. So
see, I told you.
Yeah, but I did. It reminds me, I actually have a. Let's see. Let me shrink this just for a minute so I can hold this up. But this is a A2 Pico, which is basically just like a Apple II interface to a Pico that you can then program to be a couple of different things. So it can be like a CPM card, or it can be like it can do. You can sort of. It's kind of like a programmable card. In a sense, it's like they had an FPGA based thing called a carte blanche that I sort of think of this as being similar to. Anyway, another thing I will play with at some point, but it's pretty cool that you can take these like nanos or picos or whatever, and just put them on a card interface and sort of make whatever you need without having to redesign a whole circuit.
Every computer is a backplane.
Yeah, my only complaint, I say complaint with a small c, it's not a big one, but when all of these cards solve all these problems with Raspberry Pis, you do get latency introduced by that. When you push everything into software, you're going to get latency. How much, I guess, depends on how well implemented it is, but whether it's like a nice tight bare metal implementation on the Raspberry Pi, or whether it's just booting Debian on the Raspberry Pi and converting with image magic or who knows what on the chip. But so some of them, especially with video solutions, some of them don't play games well because there's so much latency introduced by all this conversion. But I think, I guess it depends on the card. But that's one thing to watch out for, is the Raspberry Pi is not a magic bullet in that regard. There is some trade-offs associated with using it this way.
Physical limitations that give me an advantage in these cases. So it's like with my eyesight, DVD, 4K Blu-ray, whatever, all looks the same to me. I can buy any source and it's equally good. And same thing with my poor ability with games. Introducing latency really doesn't affect my score. So it opens up a lot of options that other people wouldn't be able to use. So I'm very fortunate that way, to be that bad at games.
I mean, there was a huge to drive home the point of how sensitive, especially arcade games, can be on this. I mean, when LCD TVs came out, there was a huge uproar among console gamers about it, because they have any kind of flat panel television display has some latency in it, more than CRTs do, because you're not, you don't have a beam racing in real time. The TV is taking in a frame of data and then doing some stuff and flipping transistors and whatever, and then displaying a frame and then doing it again. So there's there's a little couple of milliseconds there of latency introduced by any kind of modern television. And HDMI has only made that worse, because now there's a bunch of processing and decompression involved. Modern game consoles do compensation for that, which is all done automatically now. So it's gotten better again. But when you start plugging a retro computer into a Raspberry Pi into an HDMI TV, you're probably looking at a couple hundred milliseconds of latency between what the game thinks you're seeing and what you're seeing. And that's absolutely enough to mess up timing in, platformers and things like that. So it's something to be aware of. Again, like Carrington says, none of us are probably good enough anymore at games for that to matter, but
anymore.
Yeah. But it does mean that games may not feel like you remember them feeling. It might not be just you being old and terrible. It might actually be that the games do feel different because of these video conversions that are happening.
I guess conversely, it's also a great excuse. I would be amazing at this game if it wasn't for the latency. Oh,
it's the latency. Gotta be the latency.
Gotta be the latency.
I think that it did mess up my Jumpman when I got the C64 Mini, that little scale replica of a Commodore 64. The processor and all that and the emulation that was running had enough latency that I did notice it, because Jumpman was the one that I played so much back in the day. Yeah. And it felt like something was just a little off. And I kind of confirmed that when I played it on a real 64 with a real CRT. I was like, oh, yeah, no, I don't really stink that bad. That's the thing is introducing some lag. And I think Raspberry Pi also muddied the water a little bit too, in that they've got the Raspberry Pi computers, but then the Raspberry Pi Pico, which is a microcontroller. And someone in the chat was mentioning that particular microcontroller board might also have some programmable logic capability. I don't know. I've never plumbed the architecture on that particular chip, but I think you'll have less latency with something like that than you would with something that is intended to be a general purpose computer running a full-blown, multitasking operating system.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I wasn't aware about that on the Pico either, so that sounds like it could definitely be a little better. Yeah. So when I worked in game development industry, I mean, we did tests on this because we wanted to know how much latency can you get away with in your inputs, because of course, the more time you can spend doing things, the better. And I mean, we found even a couple of milliseconds, like single-digit milliseconds, you can absolutely feel it in the controls. Players would start to complain if the latency got much more than that. So yeah, it's surprising how little it takes to mess up the feel of an arcade game, especially a timing-based one like a platformer.
All right, let's see. I guess we can move to Earl's.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to share, or do you?
Yeah, if you'd like to share that one, Paul. Since Altair was on the agenda for today, because in 1974, I thought that I would throw in this modern upgrade for an Altair or some of the other S100 systems. So it's not just the, what would I say, the more well-known 8-bitters that have all the fun. In the S100 world, there are a surprising number, actually, of new things that come out. This one I found particularly exciting. So it's an S100 board. It's a combination of 64K of RAM and 32K of ROM, and the ROM is double EEPROM. So you can program it actually on the board itself by sending it, I think, a hex file, giving it a command to say, write this into ROM, and then boom, you've got some ROM contents for your S100 system when you turn it on. One of the other cool things about this board, you'll notice that it's got about 10 million dip switches on it. And the reason for that is you can enable in the higher memory space, if I remember right, down to a 1K granularity of whether this board is enabled or disabled at that particular range. The reason that's important is S100 systems had a bunch of different RAM boards, and they had a bunch of different ROM boards depending on what you were doing. And it's nice to have a board like this that can get out of the way of the other boards that you want to keep in your computer and just fill in the spaces that you want to fill in with either RAM or ROM. So it's very flexible. All the parts are pretty reasonably available. Now, it is a kit, and it's not even a kit of parts. You buy the bare board, and then you have to go source all of the parts yourself. When I did my
So it's not a kit; it's an idea. It's a suggestion.
Yeah, it's something
Why don't
you
you
might be
make
able
this
to
sort
do.
of thing? It's somebody trying to trick you into inventing it for them. It's probably possible. Go buy these.
So I would love to have one of these. It would actually solve a problem on an Altair computer for me. And I think there was enough interest for people to work together and make it work. What was the other thing that I wanted to say about this? Oh, so when I did the back of the napkin calculations of what it would cost to put together, including the board and all of the chips, it was a pretty big range. So I don't think I'm going to go on record with a number other than somewhere between $100 and $200. And the reason why is because there's a bunch of different distributors from which you can get these chips that you need. And, you know, if you've ever bought anything from like a Mouser or DigiKey or that, you'll know that the shipping on those can sometimes eclipse the actual parts that you're buying, depending on what you're buying and how many. Also, I noticed that in the pictures that they had of the board here, that he had all the chips in sockets. And I would like to do that if I built this board, but I didn't price out the sockets. I forgot about that. And depending on where you get them and what kind you get, those aren't necessarily super inexpensive either. So I don't know exactly what it would cost to put this together, but I don't think it would be stupid money. I think it would actually be reasonable. And it's just fun. I mean, if you could imagine, if you're going to get really hardcore and want to do some ROM programming on one of these old S100 systems, you could put your own fourth subsystem in it, or your own version of BASIC, or whatever you would want in the ROM. And I think that part would be cool to be able to do without having to get out your ROM burner and, you know, use your ultraviolet light to like erase the things. And maybe do you even have the right programmer for some of the super old ROMs? It's kind of a headache to do it old school. I think this is cheating a little bit, but I think it's cheating in a good way.
Someone in the comments is asking if these chips can all be sourced today. And the answer is yeah. Like Earl said, you can actually just go on Mouser and still buy these chips. TTL chips are still pretty easy to get. They are expensive by chip terms. Like you'll pay $1.50 a chip or something, which is stupidly expensive in terms of chips. But like if you only need 2, then it's not expensive. If you needed 10,000 for your widget that you're building in your factory, that's insane. You know, when you look at the equivalent, surface mount chip today, it'll be 3 cents, you know, at a unit cost or at a unit volume of 10,000 or something. But for a project like this, it's really not that expensive.
Yeah, and this is all through hole also.
Yeah.
So the other interesting thing is, I mean, this just came out, so I don't think they would have chosen anything that they thought was at risk of soon being unavailable. Yeah. When I looked at it, there wasn't anything terribly exotic. I think either the RAM or the ROM chip, sourcing those was a little bit tricky, and in the instructions, there's some guidance on what exactly to look for on that to make sure that you don't accidentally get the wrong one. Like the one that you get has to be 5 volt capable, whereas you can buy some of these chips in a 3.3 volt variety. You wouldn't want to do that with this board, or you blow them straight up.
Yeah, RAM can be tricky because the other thing you have to get, it can be hard to find RAM that's small enough, and it can be hard to find RAM that's slow enough. So especially now for a project like this, if you can design around it, that's okay. But like if you're replacing a RAM chip in your Apple II or something, it can be hard to get one that's actually slow enough so that the timing isn't messed up, because it's expecting like 150 nanosecond RAM or something. And I mean, the RAM nowadays is all like 3 nanosecond or something, even the TTL stuff. So that can be a problem for homebrew development. If you're trying to build like a 64K computer, you can't even buy chips that small anymore. So most of us you buy like a 512K chip and you just don't use the upper 384K or whatever. So that's a common trick. So yeah, there's some ways around that. The other thing to watch for when buying these TTL chips is they come in different series. So there's the plain like 7400 series. So like on the screen here, we've got the 74244. You can buy a 74244, or you can buy the HC or the LS version. There's a couple of others. You have to buy the right version because they do have slightly different timing and input and output loading characteristics. So again, if you're replacing a chip in your Apple II, it's going to be the old one from the 70s, which is going to be like a straight 74 244. If you go and try to put a 74HC 244 in there, it's not going to work. So that's, again, if you're designing a new board like this, though, it's clearly they've designed it around the newer LS chips, which you can still get. So that's fine. Something to watch for.
It's funny with the S100s and the Altair 88, like the thing that marks them to me is the aesthetic of that ugly front with all the switches. Like, I'm like, this isn't even a computer. As a kid, I was like, this is not a computer. I don't understand. And so you get one of those and you're like, you know what I need? I need more switches. I just stick a card in it with them. It's like for people who just love switches, man. Inside, outside, all the switches possible. I think it's just an aesthetic choice.
Well, this definitely has that. It's got so many switches. You'll never get tired of switches on this.
I mean,
These are not
it's
the fun kind of switches, though. These are the really super annoying kind of switches.
That's true. I can't quite get my thumbnail on that switch. Kind of
Little tiny screwdriver switches, yeah.
Okay, well, now I've switched all 3 of these around the one that I wanted.
It is neat, though, that they've designed configurable address decoding. Like, that's actually not that easy to do. One of the primary challenges of designing your own computer is getting address decoding sorted out so that each card gets its own address range. And making that address range both reasonable and not huge is fairly difficult. And doing it in a way that doesn't require like 68 AND gates and 52, inverters is actually not that easy. So like if you look at the Apple II memory map, it's broken up into 4K chunks and 2K chunks for a reason, because that way you can do that's the reason that's that way, is because it allows you to do address decoding with a small number of chips. So the fact that they've given you like 1K granularity and the ability to move it around anywhere you want in the memory space, that's actually quite difficult to do. So that's actually really neat on this board, I gotta say.
And if you want, you can go check out a YouTube video on Mike's channel about this board in action.
It's even embedded on the page, so you can see it. You can see it in the case, and then much of the rest of the video is looking at a monitor, which
yes,
I guess is showing it functioning. But yeah. Cool. Okay, I guess I am next. And so we are recording relatively infrequently. I don't remember when the last time we recorded was, but I think all of March went by without us recording an episode. It is now April, and March is one of the things that happens in March is the Marchantage. So where's Marchantage? Here we go. Well, so that Marchantage is it's sort of like a hashtag topic thing where you're supposed to go around and do things with your Mac, your classic Mac or whatever, and post about it. And if you search on the hashtag, you get various things. So I wasn't following it too carefully, but it seems to me that this year's 2024 Marchantage was completely dominated by global talk. So I don't know if any of the rest of you were aware of this, but I think this is Paul Rickards put up a blog post that basically just talked about how to basically set up an Apple Talk zone over the internet, like over IP. And so it involves using a piece of software called the Apple Internet Router 3.0, which is a vintage software of some kind, and configuring things so that eventually what you end up with is Apple Talk zones that exist like across the world. So you can select someone's printer in Australia and print like hello from Boston on it,
which I'm sure they'll love.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like a security nightmare.
But also sounds super fun.
It does.
Yeah. People were just loving it. Like reading people's CD-ROMs or whatever. Doing whatever across the internet. So there's some write-ups on kind of like how you can get it set up. It is possible to get it running in Qimu, so you could have a virtual Mac connecting this way. But a lot of people have, connected their shared drives or printers or whatever. And so there was quite a lot of activity throughout this month on that. So if that sounds interesting, I never did quite manage to try it. I had intended to, and then I just didn't quite get there. But there's some projects. This is Foztek's Global Talk Docker container that should be able to sort of spin up an instance. I think it's not quite ready yet, but the idea is that it'll emulate a Mac that's configured to do this. So anyway, it's definitely interesting, an interesting project, and it caught a lot of people's imagination. So
I don't think I knew it was possible to run Apple Talk over IP or over the internet like that. That's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, does it use EtherTalk with some sort of encapsulation, I wonder? Some sort of tunneling, or it's very fascinating. I'd like to learn more about this.
Yeah. My guess is that's what this server does, the Apple Internet Router 3. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it works, and it's quite possible that 70% of the people who are using it don't know how it works at that level. But it definitely, the people are definitely having a lot of fun, printing to each other's printers. So
printing to an image writer too over the internet is kind of amazing, I have to say. There's a picture of someone doing that there. That's pretty great.
And in fact, printing to someone's image writer on another continent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But
fantastic.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Image. I wonder what that image writer too is thinking. Like, where's this data coming from? I don't know. Right. I'm just going to print it. Whatever.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's probably not super secure. That's quite likely. Now, there is actually, here we go. There is a Marchantosh site, and for some reason I had closed that tab. But so if you go to the Marchantosh site, there is a Global Talk page. So click on Global Talk, and it will sort of tell you a bit about it. The way you so it took me a while to figure out even how to begin, and the way you do it is you basically sign up to be granted access to a Google Sheet that has information on like how you actually set it up. So for the first half of the month, all I saw was people just posting things like, "This is really cool," but no information about like how to start it. But this is how you do it. There's a Google form that you click on. So I guess that's about all I wanted to say about that. I guess my participation in Marchantosh was I turned on my Color Classic and then realized I didn't remember how to do anything on it. Like it has a 2E card in it, and I wanted to try to like run Total Replay or something, but I couldn't get it to recognize any disks, and so I turned it off, and that was it. Yeah. Oh, I tried to play Snood, and it is unbelievably slow. That is a very slow computer. So that's what I did for Marchantosh. Okay. I guess we can move now to Quinn's thing.
All right. So I'm going to selfishly occupy my news item with my own thing. So I'm calling it officially here on the show. I'm announcing the release of my Apple IIgs game called Catfight. This has been in the works for 7 years, which makes it sound like it must be amazing. That is immensely misleading. It is in no part amazing. It was just a technical exercise for myself to learn the techniques of the platform in some reasonably competent way. It's obviously less complete than I wanted it to be. Every game project is 10 times the size that you think it's going to be when you start. But I got it to a point where I feel comfortable calling it a game and decided to stop. As they say, art is never finished. It is only abandoned, and I am abandoning this. But it is stable. It is playable. I won't say that it's fun, but it is a complete game. It is a two-player game in the spirit of Artillery or Scorched Earth or Worms, where you are standing across a vast 2D terrain from an opponent. Said terrain is deformable, and you are hurling increasingly hilarious weapons at each other. The list of increasingly hilarious weapons that I had was, of course, vast when I started, and has been reduced to a mere 3. But it's there is some variety there at least, and there is a complete game loop. You can earn and spend money and upgrade things and so on. So there is you know, the core of a game is here, as I said, and it achieved the technical goals that I was hoping for, which was, as I said, deformable
It is
terrain.
Tinker and Sprocket.
Yes, it is Tinker and Sprocket.
I was wondering.
Yeah, the origins of this game are that my best friend's cat named Tinker came to stay with me once, and Sprocket and Tinker. So Sprocket is a bully and Tinker is a scaredy cat. So Sprocket chased Tinker all over the house until she trapped her under the bed and she peed. So that is also how this game ends. It's like Scorched Earth, but nobody gets hurt. That's the tagline. You shoot at each other and there's no health. It's just anger, and when your anger maxes out, then you pee and the other person wins. So that is the game.
Awesome.
So there's a little bit of strategy in terms of how you deform the terrain and send weapons at each other. You have to manage your economy a little bit because you have to earn money to make to make the good weapons, which you have to mine terrain to earn money to spend on better weapons and so on. So, and then there's wind and some other tricks. But anyway, that is it. It is, as I say, it's a complete game. There's a start and an end, and animations and sound and instructions, and it's all here. So it's all on GitHub, and I will have the link in the show notes. And feedback is of course welcome, but I will not be making any updates to this, so your feedback will get filed in the circular file. But I appreciate the enthusiasm anyway. It's obviously there are some known bugs in it, which I've documented on the GitHub, and I know that there's a few issues with it, but it doesn't crash as far as I know. I've tested it on real hardware in various configurations and a couple of emulators, and so it is a game. But so the bugs that remain are minor. They're cosmetic. There's some rendering glitches here and there, but nothing that I felt stopped it from being a playable game. So the main thing it would need to be considered possibly good is some playtesting, like to make it fun. I don't know that it's fun. It probably isn't, but anyway, it's here and it's done. So I have other things that I want to do. My next project is already well underway, and I didn't want to wait any longer to finish this, so I'm calling it. It's done, and cool. I will be. I'll have a link to the show notes, and I'll post a link in the Apple II Slack as well. That's
amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
fantastic.
So you're not planning on doing any updates, but if someone sent a pull request, would that work?
I'll consider pull requests. Sure. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. I can't imagine anyone wanting to. I think the main value of this might be as a reference for someone else interested in getting started in 2GS game development, because there aren't a lot of great resources out there for it. There's a couple of decent ones, which I linked to in my, the README for this game has a list of acknowledgements, references that I used, and so on. But if you just want to have here's a core game loop, here's how you do fast rendering on the GS, which is not at all obvious. Here's how you play sound on the 2GS, which again, not at all obvious. Those basic problems are solved for you, so you can see how it's done. At least this is an example of how to do that. There are some, actually, as of recently, there are a number of GS games now on GitHub. Jeremy Rand's bugs, and there's a Pac-Man clone and some other good stuff that's been going up there. So now you have a few examples at least. So we'll add this one to the pile. But it's been the barrier to entry on this platform has been very high for many years because there just aren't books or examples to look at to see how the basics are done. So hopefully this can add to that pool of options for people to look at. So I focused more on making the code easy to read than making the game good or making it optimal. So hopefully someone can read the code at least and learn how to do stuff and then maybe do it better. There's also there's a font engine in here and some other stuff that again is hard to get on the GS. There's a sprite compiler in there. There's some basic tools. There's a cross-platform build pipeline in there. So if you want to do sprite compiling, for example, I've got a sprite compiler written in Python, which again is hard to find. Everybody ends up writing their own sprite compiler for the GS because there isn't an easy-to-use cross-platform one. So that's in here. So there's some pieces in here that I think are more useful than the game itself probably is. So yeah, hopefully there's some value to the community in this thing. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, very cool.
So the source code itself is assembly?
Yeah, it's all written in CA65 assembly. Yeah, I think it's kind of the only choice for GS game development. You could certainly do some core game engine stuff in C. That's pretty reasonable. The rendering all, of course, has to be done in assembly, but I could see a person doing some of the game logic in C, probably, where performance is less critical. But yeah, on the GS, the actual rendering and stuff all has to be in assembly because it's all very weird how it all works. Yeah, it's a very slow machine for the amount of pixels that you have to push on it. That's its main problem. So you have to jump through some pretty elaborate hoops to get pixels on the screen in any kind of reasonable time frame.
I'm just curious, is it the 16-bit 6502 version?
Yes. Yeah, this is 65816, which CA65 does support. CA65 is the assembler that comes with the CC65 8-bit C development package. The CA65 assembler can do 65816 just fine, which a lot of people may not be aware of. And it's nice and cross-platform and well documented. There are other good assembler options, like Merlin 32 is a popular one, but that's Windows only. Yeah, so there's some other ones that people use, but yeah, I like CA65. It's worked for me.
Yeah, when I was working on like putting together an Apple III game, I was also using CS65, and I also sort of thought of what I was doing as, in principle, like less making a fun game and more trying to like just show examples of how to do stuff. But and I thought it might be kind of fun to actually like do a little YouTube series, walking through putting it together, and I've never done that. But I have gone back and looked at the code, and even I who wrote the code have really no idea what's going on anymore. So it's tricky. But I'm curious to see the code here too, because I know nothing about GS game development, but it is kind of, it seems like a fun area to play with.
It is. I mean, the GS it's a really lovely machine in many ways. Linear video memory is an amazing thing. Like for an Apple II person or an Amiga person who might be used to horrible video memory layouts, having linear video memory is amazing. Simple 4 bits per pixel. The colors are amazing. So it's really good at scanline interrupts. Like it's got a lot of really awesome things. It's just the machine is just too slow. That's really its only problem. If it had a 10 megahertz clock in it, this machine would be incredible. At 2.8 megahertz, well, now all of a sudden you have to make some very hard choices in game design, and you have to do some very esoteric things to get performance. For those who aren't familiar, the way you render fast on the GS is by enabling memory shadowing, which maps memory banks 0 and 1 into E0 and E1, where video memory lies, and then you point the stack because the stack is relocatable on the 65816, you point the stack into video memory, and then you push constants onto the stack, which then writes those values into video memory. And by using stack operations, you gain pointer incrementing for free, and you get short, fast instructions because you're just pushing constants. So instructions like push effective address, which pushes a constant value onto the stack, as one of the main rendering tools. And that means you have to do all of your rendering in reverse because you're pushing values onto the stack, and you have to put the machine into this insane state where you have to disable interrupts and so on because you've put the stack on video memory and you've done all these other crazy things. So it's all, it's tortured and strange, but you can do it. And if you do all of that, it's still only 1 megahertz. That's the GS's main problem, is all writes to video memory are forced to 1 megahertz for backward compatibility with the 8 bits. And that's it's the Achilles heel of this machine, but you can work around it just enough to make decent games if you're very, very careful with it. So it's, And I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. Brutal Deluxe has a program and page called Mr. Sprite where they lay out this technique that I just described briefly in much more detail and lay out the basics of how to do sprite compiling on the 2GS. And it's an incredible resource, without which I definitely would never have attempted this game. Yeah, so there's lots of smart folks out there who figured all this out. I'm just implementing it as a newbie and learning all this as I went.
So I know almost zero about the GS, but it sounds like maybe gaming wasn't one of the like core goals or something like that for the GS. I mean, I know Paul went through what he went through because the Apple III wasn't really designed to be a game machine. But I thought the GS kind of was. So I'm surprised that you had to stand on your head so much to actually make something like this.
I don't know that it was or wasn't intended for any particular use case. I think it was just that they were trying to build a 16-bit machine and they had certain design goals, lots of colors, linear video memory, but backward compatibility was also a non-negotiable goal. And that was a very, very difficult goal to achieve that just drove, I think, every other decision in the architecture. The architecture is very complex and tortured, and it's all around backward compatibility, making sure that every single piece of 8-bit Apple II software will still run on this machine, which it does. And that is pretty amazing. I mean, it's got an entire Apple IIe on a chip inside this thing, and then the entire architecture is governed by that chip. And like, basically the video chip has to check in with it to make sure it's okay to write to video memory every single time. Like it's incredibly elaborate, the hoops that they jumped through to maintain perfect backward compatibility. And it was like the only machine of the era to do that. And that was not an easy thing, but I think they knew that nobody was going to buy this thing if it didn't have full backward compatibility. And even then, like a bunch of schools bought them and mostly ran 8-bit software on them because they thought, well, we should upgrade our computers, but we still use all this 8-bit Apple II software. We're going to keep running it. Yeah, I don't know that they had an end goal in mind other than that. The line needs an upgrade and it has to be backward compatible. And that was it.
Gotcha. So that it sounds familiar, even though it wasn't a 16-bit system, that one of the most popular use cases for a Commodore 128 was to be a Commodore 64.
Yeah.
Because they made it so backwards compatible.
Yeah, the 128 is a really good analogy, actually. It's a similar design goal, and it's a similarly sort of tortured architecture to meet that goal, complex and weird in many ways. Yeah, and it's different than the Amiga, which was clearly designed to play good games. It was designed with scrolling parallax backgrounds and all these things in mind. And it was designed by people who were gamers. The Apple IIgs was not. It was designed by computer hardware people who just wanted to make a 16-bit Apple II. I don't think they had anything other than that really in mind for it. They were very forward-looking in a sense. I think they were kind of anticipating the Mac in a lot of ways because it was very much designed around this extremely elaborate ROM system that it has in it. I mean, it has a full, Mac graphical user interface in it, most of which is in ROM, which is kind of crazy. This thing has megabytes of ROM. And so that's very much where I guess if you had to pick a design goal, that's where they saw it going. They had in mind that you would use it as a low-end Mac. It was an inexpensive Mac, I think. So they expected you to use it for graphic design and word processing and so on, I guess. And it was a pretty competent machine in that capacity. It was a good low-end Mac at the time. Yeah, the potential for games was there if you were willing to swim upstream a bit with it. Yeah. All right. Well, that's my news item.
Excellent. Well, it's very, very exciting item that is. Okay, I think we have made it through the items of interest and news, and now a word from our sponsor. I guess Michael did not show up. I've been keeping an eye on the green room here, and he's not there.
But any minute now.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. What was I doing? I think
We were sponsoring.
Yes. Oh, right. I don't remember if we did this last time, but anyway, I guess I'll just do it now. And we're back. All right. The host's retrocomputing gift idea this time is David Grealish's Before Macintosh, the Apple Lisa. Did we do this last time?
I think we have. I think we've talked about this.
I think we mentioned it, but I don't think
it
it wasn't on our gift guide.
It's worth putting on the gift guide again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
So,
now the re-gift guide. If you've got this before, pack it up, give it to someone else.
But yeah, so this is now officially available. I think it had. I think maybe we when we recorded last time, I think I had a preview of it that went out to the Kickstarter people. But it's now it's basically the main way you can get it is by buying it on Vimeo. You can rent or buy it on Vimeo. Kickstarter people actually did get a physical thing, actual DVD, all 480p. But I don't think those are generally available. I think he has some left. So if you email him, then you can buy one. But the main way to get it is this the Vimeo thing. And so I think we've if you haven't heard of this before, this is basically a documentary of the Lisa computer. David talks with a number of people. So he talks with who does he talk with? So he talks with, I think, John Scully. He talks with John Woodall, who runs Vintage Micros. He talks with Bob Cook, who's the one in Logan, Utah, who's who wound up having all the leases seized and crushed in the dump. And then he talks a little bit more about to people who are sort of doing modern stuff with recreating Lisa parts and things like that. So quite interesting. He put a lot of time and work into that, and also it's been so long now since David has been on, but he's one of the founders of this very
our
podcast.
founder.
So
Yes.
So anyway, so check that out if you haven't. It is $5 to rent or $13 to buy on Vimeo.
Earl, weren't you and I on the very first episode with David, right?
We were.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
And we kicked him off his own show. That sounds like me.
Yeah, I think he did leave voluntarily. He went off to.
That's the
he
story
stepped
we're
away
telling
from
now.
vintage computing for a bit, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. So
Yeah, very cool.
So
Well
definitely
done,
check that
David.
out. Yeah, and given the speed with which these episodes arrive on the feed, this might have been 9 months ago. But anyway, right now it is available as of April. Okay, so now I guess when we're done renting or buying this movie on Vimeo, we can go to eBay and look for auctions there. Carrington has the first of these.
Oh, I do. Okay, then let me do one of those screen sharing thingies. That's what I'll do. The first one I think I have labeled. What do I call this? Like an OSHA thing, because it's on eBay as an OSHA Workers Complete Building Construction game, which is Hard Hat Back, which is a great way to describe it. I love it. It looks all scratched up, but this is one of those times where somebody has a something in a shrink wrap, and they just open the top part of the shrink wrap, and they leave the rest on to slowly bend the thing. So that's why it looks more scratched than I think it is. I just love this game. Like, there's who didn't love Hard Hat Mac? And this is an example of a classic Apple II game that I owned and paid for. I bought this thing. I remember actually owning this as a piece of software. So it's probably one of the handful of things I ever bought at the time. So if you also would like to own it, it's great. No notes, it's awesome. This is on for, I think, a buy it now of almost $90 US. It's worth it. I don't know. All old software seems expensive to me, but I love the game, and it's an example of one that I owned. So I think that's great. Another choice I made for us to consider. Here, let me copy this.
As you go to the next one, I'll point out this one does have a make offer. I always try and point that out on eBay because sometimes people overlook it. You might not have to pay the $90.
The thing is, I've noticed a new trend on eBay. Maybe not a new trend, but boy, it's happening to me a lot. If you add something to a watch list, you are so much more likely to get the person listing it to make an offer to you saying, how about this? Holy
interesting.
moly. Every time I whitelist something or watch list it, just come back in 24 hours and that person will say, will you buy it for $60? Like they'll just, you'll get kind of a reverse offer from the seller. So unless you know something's going to like sell immediately, it's better to just watch list it and walk away for 24 hours and see. You might get lucky. So that's happened to me recently a lot.
Yeah. One thing I actually wanted to say though about Hard Hat Mac too. I guess I don't have a. I'll see if I can find a better picture of this, but I'm gonna steal the stage here for a second.
Do it.
The fact that they didn't open it up means that you don't get this like great picture of the of the authors inside the folder. This is Electronic Arts had all of these sort of like folios that they had games in at this point, and this was like a trifold one where there's photos and instructions and stuff like that inside, and also a photo of the software artists, the programmers, dressed up as construction workers, So
one of the best ones of those is Wasteland, and the inside is a handful of uber nerds cosplaying like the coolest people they could think of. It's hilarious.
Yeah, the programming team dressed as Mad Max extras in Wasteland is amazing. That photo is a legend.
Yeah, so EA ones are really funny. They all look like album covers for 80s synth bands. They're really funny. So my second choice is Choplifter. And if you had an Apple II back in the day, then I know probably two things about you. Probably you had Choplifter, and probably you didn't pay for Choplifter. So this is an example of a game I loved and played. And it's nice to be reminded that it did come in packaging. Because I never saw this back in the day, not a chance. So this is one of those, it's just a little folded thing. For $80, you're getting a folded piece of paper and a floppy. But it's one of the all-time classic games. If this was being sold by where the money somehow went to the original people, I would feel guilty that I should purchase it, because I never did. But I dig it. A Choplifter. So it's just a couple of classic Apple II games, and it was fun to see the packaging, because one was packaging I knew, and one was packaging I shamefully admit that I never knew.
It's interesting that I also owned this.
You own Choplifter?
I owned Choplifter, but my package didn't look like that. My package was gray.
Was Gray as a box? Because this is like a hang tag little thing. I would assume that this is like a later release, when they're trying to like make something cheap. This looked, or maybe it was an original one.
Yeah, that looks like a re-release, like discount packaging kind of situation in this picture. Yeah. Choplifter was early. It was 82 was the initial launch of it. So that's why a lot of us never saw the packaging, because it was early. Like Hard Hat Mac was 84, so that was. More of us were of an age where we'd have seen the software in the stores by then, probably.
Though actually, mine was also. So this is like what mine looked like. It was.
Oh yeah, I remember this box.
So this is also. I mean, it's also just a folder.
It is.
It's not, It isn't a box. Yeah. So
I get, maybe it was always that way, because again, Choplifter's earlier than most people realize. It was 82, so this was just past the floppy disk in a baggy era. So this might have been just how they were doing their early pre-box packaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess what this means is that if you are collecting these things, then you've got more to collect if you want to get all the editions.
Keep them. At least it doesn't take up a lot of space. Right. Curtis in the show notes points out something interesting. Shoplifter is one of the games that went from home computer to arcade. Then vice versa.
Lode Runner did that too. There's only a couple of games that have ever done that. That might be the only two actually that have ever done it.
Mm-hmm. And then Lode Runner went on to be a board game.
Yeah, that's right. And then they made a video game of the board game. So full circle. And then they made a movie about it.
Then the last thing I've got is just a button, a little round button. Apple IIe, the most personal computer. I remember the personal computer promotion thing. You'd look at an Apple II box and it would say the personal computer. I mean, they're all personal computers, but they pushed that as like, it's really personal. I don't remember the Apple IIe getting the, no, this one, this one's all up in your business. This is a super personal computer. Hey, I have an update. No, you won't. So I don't remember this as a thing, but presumably they then try to parlay it into them. I guess other people would say, no, it's a PC. They're all personal computers. Oh yeah, we're the most personal. We just know everything about you.
Well, I vividly remember that fight over ownership of the term personal computer. Because yeah, it was very much a generic term that we all used for all computers until IBM came along and decided that we're going to take over that word and own it now. And a lot of us fought religiously to not for everything to still be called personal computer, but obviously we all lost because PC became an IBM thing. But so I remember that fight, and so this button must be a product of that culture war that was happening around that phrase, personal computer.
And it's funny too, because I would argue IBM won it not with personal computer, but just with PC. Like everybody would say the initials, which stood for personal computer, but it was like, it's a PC. Oh, but that's a Mac. Mac's not a PC. But even though it was crazy.
There was a very brief moment there where people were trying to call everything PCs. But just the cultural force behind IBM was too strong, and they ended up owning the term. But because there wasn't another good term for it. I think that was why people clung to it so hard. I mean, home computer wasn't really right, and it didn't have a catchy acronym like PC. So I think that's why everyone wanted to keep using the term.
I definitely am familiar with this slogan though, because it's on the boxes too.
Well, the personal computer one, like I remember Apple II boxes just having the personal computer, but I don't remember the most personal computer. That's what struck me. Is that what they, or am I misremembering it?
Well, now I'm gonna have to look that up.
Now you do. You do. That's what I got you this time.
I have a box.
I got you a hobby.
Yeah.
This is the show where we make Paul Google things.
Yeah.
And then
make Paul Google.
But this time, what I'm trying to do is actually like look through my photos, because there is a box and it's in my office, but and I think it says something like Santa Village on it, because that's another thing that's kind of funny about these boxes is that when you find someone on eBay who's like selling the computer with its box, you can see that like for a period of time the computer was out and being used and the box was there and they just put something else in it, so it says like rollerblades or something on it. But so I think the one that I'm thinking of here had said something like Santa Village on it, but anyway. We can come back to that later. Okay. If we're done with that, I guess, Earl, you have the next one.
Great. Are you able to project it?
I am indeed. Here we go.
So this is a Commodore PET. It's a 4016, and it's being sold for $650 or make offer. That's not really the reason why I wanted to choose this auction. I wanted to bring this up and see what the folks on the roundtable think about this. The description in the eBay auction is vintage Commodore PET model 4016-12 computer, and all in uppercase, untested, sold as is computer. So it's a computer. But aside from the redundancy, the thing that I want to bring up is if you go look at the description, the additional details, the seller mentions that they've had it for a while and that they've never plugged it in. So my initial thought on this was the same as with any eBay auction: untested equals broken. That's what I initially conclude. I just think that's the safer assumption. Because if they say it's untested, I mean, maybe it really is untested, but the reality is it could be a box of parts that you get. It might not work at all. But then I thought with this computer, as I was thinking it through, why didn't you just plug it in? It is fully self-contained. It's got a keyboard. It's got a monitor. You just take the power cord, you plug it in the wall, you flip the switch, and you see if it works. Why is it untested? I mean, at least you see if something comes up on the screen. But then as I
Or
kind of thought
comes out
about
of
that,
the fence.
well, see, that was the thing, is that then I thought further on that. And it's like, with these old computers, you never know. Could there be a component in there that's just going to fry when you power it up after it hasn't been on for, who knows, years, decades? And would it be better for someone who knew what they were doing at a personal computer repair electrical level to pop the lid and go, oh no, power that thing on, it's just going to blow up. So let's run it through a few diagnostic paces
Yeah, if
before
you had
we
some
actually.
swelling capacitors or whatever, you might visually be able to tell turning it on is a bad idea.
Right, right. Or you might be able to disconnect the motherboard and just check the power supply, which is what a lot of the YouTubers that I watch do when they get a computer that they've, they're bringing into their collection. They don't know if it works or not. They check the power supply to see if it is functioning correctly and if it's going to fry the thing before they plug it into the rest of the components. So I had this whole train of thought about this, and I just wanted to see what the team thought. I mean,
I think if somebody thinks along those lines, they're also going to be somebody who really knows a bunch about computers. So you've got a narrow person who knows enough to know that, but doesn't know enough to check it themselves. But then they'd also know that, tested and working will get you a lot more on this auction.
I mean, I think it's just a hedge, right? It's a lazy, easy hedge that I think most people probably know if you plug in something old, there's a chance it's going to blow up. But also, more importantly, if you don't know if something works, you can list it as untested and you're being honest. You can sleep at night. If you suspect it probably doesn't work because it's old, then you're going to call it untested and not try it, and then you're technically being honest, even though if it's a little disingenuous. Whereas if you test it, now you know, and now you're not going to. Now, if you list it as working or possibly working, you're knowingly lying. So I think it's just sort of a subconscious thing that people do to feel better about themselves by, it's better not to know and be honest about it that way than to sort of have to lie about it and say it's untested when you know it doesn't work because you plugged it in, So
interesting.
That's my guess. If people think it probably doesn't work, then they will say it's untested and not try it. If that's my guess anyway.
Yeah.
Because it allows them to feel like they're still being honest in the auction, but even though it's kind of disingenuous.
Nothing makes me feel like honest, like when I'm being technically honest.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, technically honest. Yeah, if you have to.
The worst kind of honest.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, the interesting thing about it is that these were not very complex systems. There are things that can go wrong with them, but not as much as I think later models. The PETs were pretty simple. There is a not bad chance that if you plug this thing in and turned it on, that it would just work. Maybe some of the RAM might be messed up after all this time because Commodore didn't always use the best RAM in their systems. I guess I won't comment too much on the price. $650 for a perfect 4016-12 might still be pushing it. One that's got engravings all over it and marked in extreme bold stencil letters, Sioux Falls.
Unless you went to that school, in this case,
Right.
It might be worth more.
Then that might be a
This is the
bonus.
computer I learned on, yeah.
Yeah, that marking on the monitor is unfortunate. That's really going to be a downer for someone.
Yeah.
I mean, that might come
Well, you
off
just put
with some
something on
acetone or
top.
something. Yeah, yeah.
Just
When I
a
was in
rug or
junior
something
high,
like
we
that.
had a little computer room that had a pen, and it was this one, like with this keyboard, not the one with the little flat chiclet keyboard, which is terrible, but this proper keyboard. So I have some nostalgia for this particular model.
Yeah, we had a couple of these at school too, yeah.
I have one, not quite exactly this one because I think mine is a 4032 or something like that. There's some other number after the 40, but I have one on my desk at work.
Does it have the
Sioux
Sioux Falls Public School stencils?
It does not. It
I
does
think
not.
Mike Eagle is going to put out a kit version of that, though, where you can get a stencil and spray on.
With a stencil, yeah.
You have to supply your own paint, though. It's just a stencil.
Yeah.
Right.
You have to populate
That's why it's a kit.
yourself. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. But there'll be a little suggested, like, paint to use.
Yeah,
Totally.
exactly.
Love it.
So that's this auction, and I only had the one, and it was more of a case study than anything else, not necessarily a specific recommendation to get this computer.
Yeah. And I don't know if we concluded anything exactly. I mean, like, I know I would be a little bit, if I didn't know about it and it looked heavy and like the kind of thing that might just explode if I plugged it in. I'm not sure that I would.
The shipping on these things must be so much. These weigh a lot.
Yeah, they're heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the shipping is tough.
And
I wonder
there's a
if they-
chance, too, that if the seller doesn't package it up correctly, even if they do
Yeah.
package it up correctly, that it's still going to arrive in more pieces than it started.
Yeah, that's the real gamble. I mean, I bought a CRT for my Commodore 64 from a guy in Manitoba, and I knew I was rolling the dice. I was fully
Yeah,
prepared. to just-
Manitoba.
yeah. Well, I was just fully prepared to throw that money away because if you didn't package it perfectly, then it's not going to survive. And it did, though. Like, he packaged the heck out of it. So amazingly, it survived perfectly. But yeah, you got to know when you're ordering a CRT, especially on eBay, that it may well arrive in pieces. That's just a chance you take.
Well, and, you know, the thing that's actually kind of rough about these is that it may not even be from, like, even if it's just perfectly padded around the outside. The thing is, it's like a heavy glass tube being supported by, you know, old cracked, you know, old fragile plastic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even if it's relatively safe from being, you know, externally jostled, if it gets dropped, it's gonna break through all its supports.
Yeah. This old plastic is very brittle. It gets very brittle at this age.
I
It's
know
not-
the feeling.
Yeah, don't we all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
I'll start
mean,
to-
parts of it are metal. I have a pet sitting right next to me right now. Listen to this.
Ah, nice.
Nice. That's Commodore filing cabinet company steel. That's,
It is indeed.
I know that sound.
yeah, that sounds like Commodore.
We see a picture of our Village 76 Santa and Pickles.
Yes, this is the box that I was remembering. It doesn't actually say the most personal computer on it. But
I'm sharing a screen with the box I was thinking of. It's not, but see, this is the
Oh,
one
yeah,
I
I see what
remember.
you're saying.
The
Yeah.
personal, the underlined personal, and it was like, this is the personal computer. But I don't remember the whole switch to the most personal computer, which is really getting like, come on, guys. Yes. We're super
no,
most. This one I've seen quite a bit. I saw the personal computer. I don't remember the most personal computer. So that must
Yeah,
be.
you might.
2E came out and they're like, no, it's even more personal than before. It's
Yeah.
super extra personal.
That's right. And then
It's
they
invasive, to be honest. Our lawyers made us put that one, the most personal computer. I don't know what to tell you, man. This thing's going to do things.
Too personal, maybe. Let's dial back the personal a little bit.
So if you break up with it, does it like stalk you?
Yeah,
It
exactly.
does.
Does it get weird if you stop using
Right.
it?
It's like, oh man.
I'm just glad I finally know what to call my band, Santa and Pickles.
All right.
That's your next two cats.
All right. Let's see. I have, as usual, I have more than I should discuss, but here's one. This is a new old stock vintage Cray scale model. This apparently was brought by, you know, people who are trying to sell people on Crays around to their prospective customers. But so it's just a little model of Cray. It's actually, I mean, I guess the part of the thing that makes it interesting is that it is actually vintage. You know, it's not like a modern thing. But anyway.
Yeah, it's like it looks like it's made of wood, probably. It's actually really neat. It's like a salesman's model.
Mm-hmm.
What a job it must have been. Like, how do you sell someone? Like, how do you walk into their office with this block of wood and say, "Give me $10 million"?
Trust me, it computes.
Yeah,
Right.
My first thought was this would make such a cool, like, Dungeons and Dragons miniatures around it. So you come into a room, what is this? A bunch of clerics, like the priesthood is praying to it. Like, that's how computers work, man.
Yep.
when I was
I still
working at-
love this design, though. I
Yeah,
love
this
this
is
design.
this is the best looking Cray. Yeah,
Yeah, this is the one with the seats around it. Come on.
yeah. When I first started at SGI, these machines were still on the service books, so the techs were still being trained on how to service them. And so for anyone who doesn't know, the seats are the power supplies. So each slice of the donut is that's like a CPU bank, and it has its own power supply. And then you connect them all in a ring like that, and it all connects together. It's just, Cray's designs are incredible. And they would do things to justify, like to make the suits feel good about spending all that money. So the liquid cooled machines like the T3E had tubing that ran out of the machine and back in, and they put bubbles and dye in the coolant so that you'd see like purple bubbles running through tubes through the outside of the machine, so it would look like it was doing something impressive. Yeah,
that works for me. That would make me want it more too. Like I love these things. I would redecorate my entire place around one of these if I had one. I'd gladly do that.
Yeah, when you're getting people to spend that kind of money on something, you got to do stuff like that to make them feel good about it, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not going very quickly because I've had this in my little list in the show notes for like 2 months or something. So they want almost $350 for it. So
ooh, that's a lot for some blocks of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that you could technically 3D print pretty easily now.
Yeah. The vintageness of it is not worth $350.
Yeah.
And it's not that old. I mean, this would have been like early 90s. I mean, like I say, these machines were still on the books in like 94 when I was working there. So it's not that old.
Yeah, 350 is pretty steep. Now, if you put Sioux Falls on it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
It's tested, apparently. It doesn't say untested, so there's that. It's a functional model.
Just the way it
model.
was supposed to.
Yeah, it does exactly what the wooden model was supposed to do.
It's the most personal wooden model. Or as Barry Bits said in the chat, it's the intimate computer. The Apple IIe was the intimate.
The intimate computer, yeah.
So good.
That might have been the Cray again, because the liquid cooled ones, it wasn't like a liquid cooled PC where you've got a heat sink and it's pumping coolant. The whole machine was full of coolant. So you actually, if you wanted to upgrade the RAM, you had to drain the coolant out of the machine. Yeah. The techs used to joke.
I didn't know that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, the techs used to joke it was the only computer where swapping out a card required a bucket.
A wetsuit came going in.
Yeah, it had a drain plug on it like a car. You had to drain the coolant out of it and then swap cards, do whatever you're going to do, and then fill it back up again.
Amazing.
Yeah, Crays were bonkers machines. They were
Cray.
They were Cray. They were
totally Cray.
Cray.
Yeah, they were something from another world. They were just like a view into an alternate universe. Those machines.
And whatever, I have endless love for them. I just
they were fascinating. They were so cool.
All right, so the next thing I have, I don't know if this is, I think this is a relatively obscure item. It's a TG Products Selecta port. So what it is, it's for the Apple II, and it basically just gives you, it breaks out your game.
The joystick game port thing. Okay.
Yeah. So it breaks it out into 5. So.
So if you had like joysticks and paddles or whatever.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
So. There was another, I forgot now what it's called, but there was another sort of common thing that you could use to externalize that port that had a zero insertion force lever thing on it that allowed you to at least sort of swap things in and out. But this one actually lets you have them all plugged in all the time, and you just like flip the switch to turn it on. So. It's pretty cool. I have a fondness for TG products because the joystick that I used was the TG products joystick. That was the one that I spent all my game playing time with.
I've held one of those. I didn't find it great, to be honest.
No,
ergonomically, I didn't dig those buttons.
No, I think I just got used to it.
Sure.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think it is not a very ergonomic joystick.
This is a nice artifact, though. It's in the original box, and it looks brand new. Like, is it even open?
Warranty's expired, though.
Good question. I don't know.
Only 5 years.
In a very good.
Like, this is definitely not something you would see like an original box for. Typically, this is the kind of thing you find like dirty at the bottom of a box at a garage sale. And $20.
Yeah, I mean it's has 5 days to go, and it's got 8 bids that have.
All right. So that's gonna go. That's gonna go for real
much.
money then. Okay.
Right. Oh, yeah.
8 bids on it already. Jeez.
Yeah. Let's see.
It's weird that there's a switch for each port. What happens if two of them are enabled at the same time?
I had the same thought earlier.
Yeah.
I was like, or when you put the one switch in, the rest pop up. It's one of those things.
Yeah, it needs to.
I kept thinking, like, can I do two at once? What
does it do? Probably not good. It's funny. We've talked about this before, but it's funny how like dangerous home computers used to be in the sense of like how easy it was to destroy them. Like the Apple II, if you plug in a disk drive when the machine is on, you destroy it. You either wreck the card or the analog card in the drive or both or some piece of them on the board. Like, yeah, if you just did some slightly wrong thing, it would just ruin your $5,000 investment. Computers nowadays are just immune to all of that kind of shenanigan.
It's so funny how growing up, it was all about that. I'm about to make a change. Everything gets powered down. Before I plug in anything, I'm plugging in external thing. And then it's now, we live in a world of hot swapping. And it took me a while to like, I can just plug this USB thing on. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had to unlearn that.
Like Mark says in the comments, like different unrelated things had the same connector sometimes. Like your disk drive and your serial port were both a 20 DB25, and if you plug the wrong one into the wrong thing, it would just destroy both. Like, yeah.
Or when you try to save a file, you see the joystick wiggling. You're like, oh no, I'm saving to the joystick.
What the Apple IIc, if I'm not mistaken, had like the power was the same as like one of the other plugs. I mean, like
because it's that round. It looks like it anyway.
Yeah.
They were very similar.
Some sort of DIN connector.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that if they were identical, but yeah, they were extremely similar and right next to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think since these were resistors, though, like somebody pointed out in the chat that these were between 0 and 150k ohms, or was it 150 ohms?
It was 150k. Yeah.
150k ohms. So if you did two at the same time, all you would do is have the equation for resistance in parallel. It wouldn't blow anything up, I think.
Yeah, you're probably right. It probably wouldn't hurt anything. It would just, it would read funny, but it wouldn't damage anything. It's probably correct. Yeah.
So I wonder if would it be additive? I mean, like if you put them both in and put both joysticks to the right, would it go right?
Well, it would have it, like it would turn into a voltage divider, I guess.
Oh,
so
I see. Okay.
It would be, it would like one joystick would only read half as much if the other joystick was sitting in the middle, kind of thing. It wouldn't, So it would do weird things, but not hurt anything, I guess.
I do have one of these, and this is a picture of mine. The box in the auction is in better shape, but
so you
there's
got to
a bunch
get
of
another
documentation. So, yeah. Okay, let's see. Now, here it is. Okay. Right. What is next? Oh yeah.
So I see your strategy here. You're picking auction items that you've already bought, so that you don't have to buy them again.
Right. But also, I know like I recognize things that are kind of cool. But all right. So this is kind of interesting. It is Apple IIe, 2GS, 2C collection, Super Drives controller. It's pretty good. It's a $1,000 first bid, ends in 3 days, and so I'm going through some of the pictures. There's a 2E with some 5 1/4 and 3.5 inch drives and a monitor. Here's a 2GS with a monitor and keyboard and mouse
and boxes.
Drive. Yeah. Here's a 2C with a monitor. A whole lot of manuals and stuff like this. Discs. Here's the boxes.
Oh wow.
So it looks pretty nice, but so it is. I think it is local pickup only, and it says items description from the seller, local pickup only. Here's all the stuff there is, and whereas you sort of keep going, why am I selling this? I've gotten all the joy out of it. It's time for someone else to have it that can appreciate it. And I'm not going to slice it up into smaller pieces. If it doesn't sell, I'm going to junk it.
Oh.
And yet we're starting at $1,000. If I don't get $1,000, I'm throwing it away.
Yeah.
$900. I'd rather make it burn.
Yeah. $20.
Yeah,
nope. Don't want your $20. Like.
Yeah. It is. It ends in a very sort of a funny, aggressive note. It's like I'm not splitting this up. If nobody gets it, I'm going to the recycler with it. If you go to the recycler later, you can maybe salvage some of the broken boards.
Yeah, I was going to say this is like a thread at the end. You can find the broken PCBs at a local e-waste facility. Like,
Yeah, bid on this
geez.
auction or the Apple IIe gets it.
Yeah, seriously. It's a nice collection. Be a shame if something were to happen to it.
So anyway,
Jeez.
yeah. I mean, and it is nice.
I mean, up until
maybe
that
insane,
point,
but-
I was going,
$1,000 isn't actually unreasonable. Like if it bid up to that or whatever, it's 3 computers,
Yeah.
boxes, like great.
It's-
But I
yeah.
mean, to start at 1,000 is like okay for something you're going to throw out. Otherwise, seems pricey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's got to be somebody who's really interested in Apple II stuff and has nothing.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
Yeah.
Well, and the
You
local
don't-
pickup only is going to kill it.
where,
Like,
and where is it located?
It
Valencia,
Where's the local?
California,
Yeah. Okay.
which actually is a good area. I mean, that's the
Hmm.
Los Angeles metro area, so they are likely to find someone who's willing to drive to there. But
If they see this.
yeah, but yeah, $1,000 starting bid. I mean, you're probably not gonna. I mean, that is a fair price for this entire set, but getting people to buy whole collections is really difficult. Like nobody wants to buy your whole collection.
Yeah.
People always want to sell it that way because it's easy for them.
Sure.
But buyers never want that. I mean, like he's got 12 drives in here, which is amazing, but nobody wants 12 drives. Everybody wants, like, someone wants those super drives and somebody wants that duo disc, but nobody wants all 12
And I get it as
drives.
a seller, it's a pain to piece it out. Like,
Yeah, it
I
is.
can see that
but-
as well. But you could also say that we're starting at $200 and I get what I get because I'm throwing it otherwise. And
Yeah.
it would probably bid up to over 1,000.
Yeah, started at $1. Like if you're willing to do local, if it's local pickup only, it's nothing to you. If somebody's willing to come and get it for nothing, it's less work for you than driving it to the e-waste facility. So
Right.
list it for $1 and you get what you get for it. Like, yeah, that $1,000 or I'm trashing it is a strange ultimatum.
now I don't know if they mean it, but on this, there's a make offer also.
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
just point that out.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We call that the Earl button.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're all done.
Yeah. Yeah. We could also. I don't know if this was the suggestion here in the chat, but it was suggested that we click watch, and
Yeah.
because who knows, they may come back in 2 days with an
offer. Oh, you could
specific
also make an
offer.
offer and say, I'm willing to take it to the dump for you for free. So if it doesn't sell, it's like, great,
Yeah.
load it in my car and
Yes,
trust me, that's
exactly.
where it's going.
That is great. I love that. Yeah.
There's
Hey,
my offer.
I'll take it to the e-waste for you.
I'll do that, no worries.
That's-
Don't you worry.
That's
I
pretty
got
great.
you.
All 3 machines demonstrated working though too, which
Yeah.
for an
Yep.
eBay auction, that's not nothing.
Yep, and not super yellowed, and yeah, nice look.
Yeah.
Well, you never know about yellowing with photos, but
Yeah. And the original boxes, like it is a very nice collection, and for $1,000 is pretty reasonable. But yeah.
and with the coloring of the 2C keyboard, there's a chance it's the 2C keyboard that I really like. There's one version of the 2C, you have to look at the number on the back, that'll tell you, that has a much nicer keyboard than the earlier ones. It feels as nice. It's got the same switches as the 2C Plus, which is a lot nicer than the sponginess of the early 2C. And the nice ones are that gray, but not all of that gray are the nice ones.
Yeah. Yeah, the later 2Cs, 2C Plus, and the 2GS all have that same key switch in them. And it's
So nice.
the best keyboard Apple ever
Yeah.
made. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
or Apple ever had made.
Yeah.
Right, yes. Yes.
To this day, if I could use my GS keyboard on my MacBook Pro sitting in front of me, I would, because it's a better keyboard than this thing has on it.
Okay, let's see. I'll
What else you got for us?
Okay, here's a weird one. It is so we've talked about.
Oh, I saw this. I clicked on it because I was wondering what the heck it was.
Yeah. So the microprofessor. This is the company that became Multitech, that became Acer, I think. They have made a couple of these things called microprofessors. The microprofessor 1B, I think, was like a Z80, a little like programmable, like a single board computer of a kind. The microprofessor 2 was an Apple II clone that was it was sort of a not really compatible clone. So I think we've talked about that a little bit. This is the microprofessor 3, which is an Apple IIe clone. And I don't think I've ever... I think I might have come across the existence of this, but I'd forgotten. It is not common. So it's not very interesting looking. It kind of looks like a PC Junior or something, but...
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it has this one has a Z80 card in it. And it has a slot on the side, I think, like the what do you call them?
The laser.
The laser, yes. So it's interesting. I suspect that because they are so uncommon, this is not going to go for cheap. It's right now at 10 bids has it at $76, but it has 5 days to go. But anyway, an interesting
Never seen
object.
that. I didn't know those existed. What? Why has someone crossed out the model number and written in a different one with Sharpie?
That's how you did upgrades back then.
That's right.
That's
This is hard to understand. So the Microprocessor 3, 311, I think, was the NTSC version, and 312 was the PAL version. On this label, it said 310 before and was crossed off, and now has 312 written, but it is an NTSC on the label. So I really don't know what this is. My guess is it's probably a 311.
Unless
I don't know.
it did get upgraded, and so they put in for, or they swapped the card, and so it gets sold as a 312. Like, does it take 240 volt?
I wonder if there's any way to tell that. Like, I wonder if we can see any.
On the power supply, like maybe this is
Power.
actually a PAL version.
like there might be a story there. Like if that correction was made at the factory, that's interesting. Like it was I don't know, they put the wrong label on it, or they
Had the one label, so they just go like,
yeah.
life is cheap. We just upgraded.
But if it was done by an end user, that's sort of weird. Why would someone do that unless, they knew enough about these machines to know that, oh, I put this upgrade in it and now it is a 312, so I'm going to do that. I don't know. It's a strange... Right. There's a story there. I want to know what it is.
Right. And
Yeah, like
probably it's
that label on the back should say whether it's 120 or 240. But
Yeah,
also
it
could have
should.
been like a universal power supply or something. Who knows?
Yeah, so I'm looking at a picture of the back where there's a sort of the kind of like standard plug and a label underneath that I just can't read. It's just too blurry, but probably does say something there. Anyway, but it is an interesting object. The Wikipedia does sort of go through this. I think somewhere So Multitech MPF 311 was in NTSC countries, US and Canada, and the 312 was in PAL countries, and no mention of a 310.
Oh, a key feature of the 3 was a Chinese localized version of AppleSoft. That's interesting.
Wow.
Wonder what that looks like. Do they have some kind of Mandarin character ROM or something in it as well? I wonder. Like,
Cool, if so.
how do you localize AppleSoft? That's really interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see.
It's neat that it has both a monitor out, an RCA jack, and also a TV out. As like that, those are distinct things.
Yeah.
Two RCA jacks, but one's monitor, one's TV.
Yeah, so it's got an RF modulator built in, which
I assume
the Apple IIe's did not. So that's sort of an upgrade, I guess.
right, and a mic jack in and headphones out. Like they have a lot of neat things on the back. So.
Yeah. The Microprocessor 2, the Apple II clone, also had Chinese localized BASIC.
Okay.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, right, the Microprocessor 2 has no text page. It renders everything in high-res graphics.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that. Yeah.
And I think that was
Okay.
partly due to the trying
Due
to
to
have the Chinese
needing
characters.
to render the Chinese characters. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Excellent. What is this? So I'm looking at a picture of a Microprocessor 2 with a keyboard attached, and in the corner there is another computer, like just sort
Is that
of
an
like
Aquarius?
that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, that was
Or
my
is
guess
it
too.
Sam Coupe?
Because
it
those
might-
come in all
It looks
things.
like an
The
Aquarius to
The
me.
colors of it,
Yeah,
the
maybe
blue
it is.
especially, make me think Aquarius.
Okay. All right.
And it's a membrane keyboard too, which
Yeah.
also says Aquarius.
Okay. Excellent. Anyway, so that's a microprocessor that I wasn't really that familiar with, and I think I will probably.
Oh, with the
I'll say this one thing.
Greg in the chat though says the label, presumably, but the Microprocessor 3, the label on the power plug says 220 volt.
Okay. All right. So maybe.
So
it
okay,
really
so maybe it is the PAL version.
You think if they were changing the label manually, they would have also scratched out NTSC and written PAL.
Yeah.
Like you changed the one part, but not. and the
Yeah,
whole thing's
that's
odd.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does seem like, one part is more interesting than the other. If I would change the PAL thing first, because that's the thing that matters.
Yeah.
But, okay, and then I guess this will be the last thing. It is a Apple IIe enhancement kit box, which is kind of interesting as an artifact. That if you had an Apple IIe, you could upgrade it basically by changing the ROM and the processor, so this is a box that this came in, and one note about this though is that
It's got the old things in it.
yeah, exactly, like whenever you find these, what you are usually finding are de-enhancement kits, because someone put the old chips in the box.
Of course, because that's what you would do. Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. So anyway, okay, I think that's probably good enough. I will leave it there. Okay, so now I guess we've made it all the way through, and we can move to closing discussions. And Carrington, you are the first.
What have I got? I've been playing a lot of vintage games lately on my iMac G4. I've gone back into Mac gaming, CD-ROM games. So I played Full Throttle, and I played, what else is up on this shelf? I played Obsidian, which was like a Myst type game that I was always really interested in, because it was like Myst, but even cooler and like super rendered or whatever. It is terrible. It's like, oh my gosh, it has such a good reputation. But the problem is it came out at the wrong time. So they were so amazingly impressed that they could do a 3D render thing and then like kind of move you through the space. So when you click on an area, it walks you there. And like, that's really impressive. But they just keep sending you to a hub. Like every time you do a thing, why don't you walk back to the middle? Why don't you walk back? Like, so you see the same thing like 500 times. I was like, come on, man. So it was okay, but not great. And it has multiple endings, by which I mean, as far as I can tell, 2. And you have to back up quite a bit to see the second ending. So I say no. Full Throttle was fun, but Obsidian, after all these years of thinking it was going to be the best ever, it was not. But whatever, old games, still fun.
I think I played that a little bit. Like I don't think I bought it. I think someone gave it to me.
Who pays for
something like
software?
that. Yeah. So I
You
mean,
get
I
Catfight
have
for
the
free.
physical CDs, but yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't remember enough about it, but I do remember it was in that sort of like Myst style. Mm-hmm. So, which meant that I probably didn't play very much of it, because I got a sense for how it looked, and then I thought, this is not the best use of time.
It's very much the low polygon 3D rendered thing. It's got a look where you're like, oh, I remember that era. Yeah. It's very much welcome to 1999. We're gonna jack into the Matrix, baby. So
That era of games has not aged well. Like 3D doesn't age well. I think that's this big problem. Like the old 2D pixel art games all are now charming. Like SimCity 2000 looks better than ever now, because now it's charming. But like, yeah, that 90s 3D stuff just looks like garbage now.
see, I think it could have been charming, but the problem is like the 90s 3D also was being extreme, and it was like it's not trying to make a charming thing. It's trying to be angular and cool. It's like, dude, you're not cool. I know. It's like me. You gotta accept it. We're just not cool, man.
Like there was only so many aesthetics you could do with 12 triangles, I think was the problem.
Right. Oh, tell me about it.
Okay, let's see. Earl, you have the next closing notes.
I guess the only thing I'll throw out is, since the last time we recorded, Randy Kindig and I came out with another episode of Next Without 4 that I will shamelessly plug here. It was on Chip 8, which is a interpreted programming environment. It's more low level than BASIC. It ran on some systems that were extremely modest in terms of hardware, but would still let you make fun little games. And it was mostly for games. So I won't spoil the rest. The episode's out there, Next Without 4 chip8.org, and we had fun doing that. We went down a bunch of rabbit holes with Chip8 because it, during its lifetime, it found a lot of different homes and implementations. So that was fun.
I was excited to see a new episode drop. I was like, oh, look at this. Yeah.
That was a good one. You guys sent me down a rabbit hole about Chip8 too. I was sort of vaguely aware of it, but didn't know that much about it. And
yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. It's still a pretty vibrant ecosystem. There's still a lot of people writing games for it. So if people have an interest in writing really limited games for sort of pseudo fantasy consoles, it's a really good choice because it's so simple and so approachable and runs on everything. Like, yeah, it's such a low performance target that you can write an emulator for anything. As you guys said on the show, even the HP48 calculator had an implementation of it, which I didn't even know about. And I was a heavy HP48 user at the time.
Cool. And yeah, I guess there was a convention that just stopped happening just before.
The Octojam.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just missed it, as is so often the case. You find something really exciting that was going on for 10 years and ended yesterday, just before you did the episode. But out of that came a lot of additional software for the Chip8 platform. So you can still get access to all that and check out the things that they did.
Excellent. Let's see. I guess what's going on with me? I don't know. Doesn't seem like that much has been going on with me. Kansas Fest has been announced, I think, since the last time we recorded. So
moved.
It moved. Yes, it's
it's even less in Kansas now.
That's right. Yeah,
keeps going further from Kansas.
It wasn't. I think it is true that it has never been in Kansas, but it is now. Yeah, it is in 2024. It's in Illinois, and it's
it's in Kansas, Illinois.
We'll do honorarily. Yeah. But so it's 2024 is some sort of round number of years since 1984. And that was when the Apple IIc was introduced, and so the theme this year is the Apple IIc. So that should be interesting. So anyway, yeah, I mean that'll be fun. And what else has been going on? I don't know. It seems like not a lot of time left over for retro things, but I'm working on trying to carve the time out. So. All right, Quinn, any closing notes about working on your arcade game?
Yeah. So there was other retro activity that was generated by that for me. So
awesome.
I wasn't able to release the game until I tested it on real hardware, of course, because GS emulators are not good enough to trust to just release something and assume it will run on real hardware. I think on Virtual 2 and the 8-bits, I think you actually could. I've only ever found maybe one thing on the 2C Plus, an obscure edge case that didn't work perfectly on Virtual 2, but otherwise it's incredible. But yeah, GS, now you got to test it on real hardware. So I knew I was going to have a few bugs to fix there. I ended up completely removing one of my, I had a border effect on the title screen, which I was very proud of. So the title screen, for those not on the stream, shows a slice of green terrain, and I did a green stripe into the border on either side, so the terrain continues into the border, which is done with scanline interrupts. Very, very basic as GS border effects go effect, but I was very proud of it. And it worked perfectly on all the emulators that I tried and blew up horribly on real hardware, so horribly. So horribly that it took me a while to even figure out what was crashing. So I was getting a fatal error in ProDOS 8 that I didn't know existed. The screen goes black and it just displays a message that says restart system $1 in a white ASCII box. And it took me a while to figure out that it was ProDOS generating that message. Anyway, working backwards from first principles, thanks very much to the Apple II Slack team, we figured out what was happening, which is that I was not managing interrupt state properly in the machine. And so some scanline interrupts were going unhandled, and they were accumulating in ProDOS 8 because I boot the game in ProDOS 8 because if it's good enough for Will Harvey, it's good enough for me. And so that I'm not using GSOS or something else that would be handling interrupts as well. So they were just sort of piling up quietly inside ProDOS 8. And it turns out if you hit 255 unhandled interrupts in ProDOS 8, it barfs with this very mysterious black screen of death, if you will, which I did not know ProDOS was capable of displaying, but it is. Someone on the Apple II Slack even found the code in the ProDOS source code that generates that error, so we could confirm that it was coming from ProDOS, because you couldn't tell, like, is this a firmware GS error? Is this like a ROM error? Is this a firmware error? Is this a ProDOS error? So anyway, long story short, we figured out what I was doing wrong with my interrupt management, and fixing it was going to be a ton of work. So I just disabled the effect because it wasn't worth the amount of work it was going to be to fix it. But I learned a valuable lesson about how to properly manage interrupts on the 2GS, which is in the notes on Catfight. So if someone is interested in scanline interrupts, I also generated a minimal test code demonstration of scanline interrupts on the GS, because again, it's something that wasn't super well documented, and I couldn't find any sample code of anyone doing it. So I also put out a little sample program that just flashes the border on a scanline interrupt so you can see how it's done. Because it's a very powerful tool on the GS, but it was a bit of a dark art. The people that knew how to do it had not posted their code anywhere. So, but more to the point of all that was that I had to test it on real hardware, and my real hardware did not work. I brought my GS out of retirement. It was sitting in my parents' basement.
GS?
Yeah, the infamous basement GS. 30 years.
You heard about it for years.
Yeah, pulled it out, turned it on, and nothing. I was like 100% confident it would just boot up, because there's no reason it shouldn't. It was perfectly stored in a climate-controlled basement in a box. It had, it ran when parked, as we say in the used car biz, and there was no reason to believe it wouldn't just fire right up. But it was, I turned it on and it was making a high-frequency clicking noise, which I believe is the crowbar circuit, which is when the power supply detects a short. On the zero crossing moment of the AC signal, so 60 times a second, it detects a short and it cuts the power, and then it tries again, basically. So you get this like 30 or 60 hertz clicking noise coming from the power supply. So that appeared to be what was happening. Rather than spending a lot of time diagnosing it, I thought, well, I'll just pull out the guts and I'll put in the reactive micro replacement. So Reactive Micro sells a universal power supply replacement for all Apple IIs. It's a really slick little kit. You open up the metal box of your Apple II power supply, you pull out the circuit board, and you put in the Reactive Micro one, and it has little sections that you snap off of the circuit board for different Apple IIs. It's really clever. And that's when I found out I have an applied engineering power supply in my 2GS, because I was following the Reactive Micro instructions, and there's at one point it says, your power supply will look like one of these three. And I'm like, my power supply does not look like any of those three. That's weird. And so I start looking at it, and sure enough, there was an applied engineering sticker on the side of it. And bear in mind that I owned this machine as my daily driver for 10 years, and I never knew this thing had an applied engineering power supply in it.
You didn't change the power supply? You must have got it with that already in there?
Yeah, I bought the machine secondhand from a guy on a BBS, and I knew, so he put the transwarp in it and did some other stuff to it. The only thing I ever did to it is I added a sonic blaster, but I had no idea he had upgraded the power supply in it. So all those years I had the AE supply and didn't know. So cool fun fact though, the Reactive Micro kit also works with the applied engineering power supply. So only thing I had to do was extend a couple of the wires, which was no biggie, a little bit of soldering. But for anyone wondering, that kit is an excellent thing. Like if it wasn't for that one weird edge case, it took 10 minutes. It was such an easy upgrade, and seems to work perfectly. So
nice.
And in that process, I also found out that my machine, my GS, which again I owned for 10 years and used every day for 10 years, came from the high school that I went to, and I did not know this. While looking around on this thing, I noticed the remains of a sticker on the side of it for Sir Winston Churchill High School in Calgary. And
see, if they had put a big stencil on the top, like other people, then you'd know.
Yeah, so 30 years later, I learned that the guy I bought it from bought it secondhand from our high school, or from the high school that I went to. He did not go to that high school. He went to a different one, but he happened to buy it from the high school that I went to. I thought he was the original owner. So like, there's just so much history here, which is of interest to nobody except me, but it was amazing that it was this half-removed sticker. Again, how did I never notice the sticker on the side of this machine for 10 years? But there it was. So I had a 2GS from my own high school all this time.
Is there a chance that you actually used it before you owned it?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, no, because we didn't have Apple IIs at my high school by the time I was there. We had they had upgraded to PC, so we had Olivetti PC XT clones in the main computer lab, and then we had a senior lab that was full of IBM PS2s, which, that room just smelled like money. You walk in and there's 30 IBM PS2s. Like, some salesman talked the school district into that, and we weren't even allowed in that room because these machines were so expensive. So those were the two computer labs. We didn't have any Apple IIs by then. But anyway, long story short, Reactive Micro Kit worked great. Machine runs perfectly now. CRTs are worse than I remember, which is interesting. I remembered the 2GS having this incredible, beautiful display, and it's tiny and flickery and dark. And I mean, I suppose it's possible it's worn out, but I think it's working correctly. I think CRTs are just worse than we remember. But machine works great now though, and so it was fun to see my game running on real hardware for the first time.
Nice.
Excellent.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think I seem to remember. I don't know. This is probably some Kansas Fest many years ago when I think you were working on this very game.
Yes.
Right. And
I was
testing it first on hardware and finding it failing.
Yeah. Technically, the first hardware it ran on, which is also fun, was John Brooks's 2GS that he had brought that year. That was the first time I ever saw any piece of it. At that point, all I had was the 2D terrain engine as kind of a proof of concept, just because that was the main technical goal for the thing, was to have a 60 frames per second scrolling 2D deformable terrain. That was what I wanted. That eventually turned into a whole game. But that proof of concept demo I managed to run on John's 2GS. And that's when I learned how bad the emulators are, because it was, all of the timing was wrong in my code, because I had been relying on the timing of these emulators to know if I still had time left in the frame, to render more or whatever. So it was just all completely off. Basically, you have like 40% less time in a frame to render than the emulators will make you think you do. Like, you have so much less time. So, Yeah,
I ran into nearly exactly that problem with the Apple III thing, because the one emulator that I think they fixed it now, but the one emulator that emulates the Apple III just plows ahead at 2 megahertz, even though the actual machine shifts down to 1 megahertz like 70% of the time.
Yeah, so I think that's a similar problem with the 2GS emulators, is that, they assume a lot fewer of the slow clock cycles than are actually happening in the machine. So you have a lot less time than you think you do. That's apparently what Crossrunner is fixing, the latest 2GS emulator. It's apparently cycle accurate, which apparently means it will it's accurately apparently emulating all of those weird slowdowns and slow clock cycles and fast clock cycles going back and forth that the GS does internally. It's apparently very, very good. It's Windows only, unfortunately, which is going to keep me from probably being able to use it. But it looks like a very, very cool emulator.
Okay.
That's it for me, though.
All right. Excellent. And I think this has turned out to be a relatively long episode. So perhaps that should be it for us as well. So thanks, everyone in the chat for sticking around for all of that. And I guess there's something I say at the end here. How does this go? Here we go. So that's it for this show. You can find the show notes for this and all the RCR shows at rcrpodcast.com. You can find lo-fi episodes and more via Gopher at rcrpodcast.com. You can discuss the show in the forums at forum.vcfed.org. Something. You can follow RCR on Mastodon at podcast.social at rcrpodcast. If you watch the YouTube stream, you can watch everybody dance as I say this. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/RCRpodcasts. Send feedback to feedback@rcrpodcast.com, where we will at some point catch up and read it on the show. We are a member of the Throwback Network at throwbackreviews.com, and write a review on iTunes if you want. And until next time,
Retrocompute.
Yeah, okay.
Not our worst.
Yeah. Yeah, the one I was just editing, I had managed to say the entire retrocompute before anybody else came in. It was very nice.
The problem is that we keep waiting longer and longer because everybody's waiting for someone else to start. We just need like a hand signal or something. Like, go.
Yeah. And
That's why if we
actually hadn't
dance, we'll be
recorded
in
his.
time.
There you go.
Yeah, right. That's what we should do. Yeah, choreograph this. Okay, cool.
Fun stuff.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks, YouTube. We will see you next time.
See you next time, YouTube.